All right, I think we're ready to go. We're live, yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Diane Sterfener, and I'm the president of Support Ed. And we are going to record today's presentation, and we will send it to you very soon, hopefully by tomorrow. So just a little info about us. Support Ed is located in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and we focus only on serving English learners and their teachers. We're a group of EL experts who provide online and face-to-face professional development, program technical assistance, and research so that ELs receive an equitable and excellent education. We recently offered an online SLIFE course, and we noted there was a need for even more practical information on this topic. So that's why we're thrilled that Kleiber and Sonia Arellano of Fairfax County Public Schools, Virginia, will be sharing their expertise with you today. Let's get started. So you can see on your screen, hopefully, we want to give you some tips on getting started with our platform, which is called Zoom. So you can hopefully see your own control bar, and we're going to be pausing at a few points during the presentation to ask questions at 3 different points. But you can type in your questions whenever during our presentation, and they'll be loaded in the queue. So to do that, you would click the Q&A button to ask questions. And then if you have any technical difficulties or just want to chat a little bit, like we've been doing so far, click the chat button. And after our presentation, we'll be sending you a PDF of the presentation again, as well as a recording of this webinar. So thanks. Let's get started.
It's breaking up. Can you all hear us? I think we're getting some feedback in the chat.
Yeah, it might be your own computer connection or internet connection. So we'll keep going.
All right, so good afternoon. My name is Kleiber. I am one of the ESOL coordinators in Fairfax County Public Schools.
And hello, my name is Sonia Arellano, and I am one of the ESOL managers here at Fairfax County Public Schools.
And this is a journey that we've been on, I think we were reminiscing, for about 2 years now. So this is fairly new work with everyone. We have been focusing on building supports for students with limited and interrupted formal education in our schools. The outcomes of today's presentation are to define our theory of action for serving SLIFE students, to examine supports for recently arrived English learners, to outline our solution-seeking approach to identifying students' needs, and exploring intervention design for SLIFE students with significant home language literacy gaps. So one of the things that we struggled with when we were starting this work was the number of terms and having specific definitions for each one. So I think we're all familiar with English learners, but the additional terms that we heard floating around were our recently arrived ELs, refugees, newcomers, which are the same thing as recently arrived ELs, except under ESSA, they're referred to recently arrived ELs instead of newcomers, unaccompanied minors, and SLIFE. So as we talk a little bit more, we'll be exploring the definitions for these and talking about the importance of using the terms accurately and with specificity to really describe what's happening within our school division. So this year, or I would say in 2016, in Fairfax County Public Schools, we have 35,643 English learners, right? Students who are identified as learning English. We have 3,972 recently arrived English learners, or newcomers. Those are students who arrived in the United States within the past year. And then we really had to focus and create our own definition to capture the data around SLIFE students, because prior to 2015, we did not collect any data because we had no way of identifying the students with limited or significant interruptions in their education. So according to our data in 2016, we have 434 students that meet this category. On your screen now, you can see the definitions that we're using here in Fairfax. The first 4 are the federal definitions, right? The federal definitions of English learner, of newcomers, of unaccompanied minors, and of refugees. And these are important to be accurate about because we were hearing about thousands of unaccompanied minors coming into Virginia. Well, it is about 1,000 in Fairfax, but it's not more than that. And then again, we did not have a definition for students with interrupted or limited formal education, and our division needed to adopt one in order to specifically talk about these students. Because prior to that, we were hearing again that there were thousands of students with interrupted or limited formal education in Fairfax, and we really wanted to be specific about the students we were talking about, both to be accurate in our data collection and accurate in describing students' needs. So we have developed a theory of action, and this theory of action is really about our strategy of how we're identifying and thinking about this problem of practice. We see the number of recently arrived ELs and the number of SLIFE students as overlapping, and as SLIFE students being part of our recently arrived EL population. So our theory is that if we equip our recently arrived English learners with skills to acclimate, build community, study effectively, and self-advocate, then the majority of those recently arrived ELs will have their general social and emotional needs met, their academic needs met, and they will gain important school readiness skills. Our students will then be more successful in school. Today, we're going to talk also about WIDA's 7 integral factors, which is a tool that we use to problem solve for students, because what we find is that identifying a specific problem helps us match a specific solution for a specific student, and that is an individual problem solving process. We also look at home language literacy and numeracy gaps. So when we're thinking about educational gaps, we're thinking about gaps in the home language rather than in English, but then designing and delivering intervention in English for students who need it. So that's the theory of action. We'll get a lot more details as we move on. This year in Fairfax County Public School, we have also are in the process of implementing a new program model that includes newcomer services and SLIFE services. And those are made up of these 3 components: cohort model, strategies for success, and SLIFE services, and we'll define each of those as part of our programming here in FCPS. One of the things we want you to think about today is that as we have recently arrived students coming into the United States, coming into Virginia, Fairfax County Public Schools, there is a significant amount of research about core stressors that our students may be coming in with significant trauma, either from their migration experience itself or what happened in their home country prior to leaving, that there are students who are coming in and that once they're here, they may experience loneliness and a feeling of isolation, that there are resettlement issues happening that relate to healthcare or basic needs, and that as students acclimate to the United States, there's an acculturation process that happens. And so some of our theory of action is that we have to specifically design programming that will support students with acclimating to U.S. schools. So in U.S. schools, our recently arrived ELs may find it difficult to sit for long periods of time or not be accustomed to following a bell schedule, using a planner, raising a hand to speak, lining up, all of those things that we kind of take for granted. In addition, our schools can be organized in such a way that students also need help acclimating to emergency drills, co-ed classes, the role of school personnel. So we have designed specific programming elements to support our recently arrived English learner students. The first is really valuing the contributions of our students, valuing home language, cultures, families, and experiences. Delivering rigorous grade level content, so making sure our students have access to grade level standards right away, even if they're new to the country, offering multiple educational pathways for success, and providing social emotional support. So those are the research-based key elements of newcomer programming from the U.S. Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit, which has been a great resource for us. And we really want to start with this element of creating a welcoming environment, that students feel valued, that they feel supported, and they know how to advocate and be part of our school communities. So first, we have established a cohort model, which means that our students share a cohort of teachers and that there is a cohort of students who may travel together. What we are finding is that by clustering recently arrived students, it's really helpful in supporting them. Prior to this, our students who are recently arrived might have been mixed in with many other level 1 or 2 students and did not have specific supports designed for them. We want their team of teachers, so it might be at the secondary level, a math, science, social studies, language arts teacher, to share some common practices that help lower the affective filter for the students. So this would be common organizational practices, having a common way to use a planner, a common way to use a binder, instead of having one requirement for one class where you have to have 5 notebooks of different colors, and then another requirement for another class where you have to have a binder, a folder, and a notebook. Having common organizational practices really supports our newcomer, recently arrived students. That includes our SLIFE students. The other part is we would like those newcomer teachers to have common behavior expectations. Often transitioning to US schools is very confusing. The rules of behavior seem very loose, yet they may be stricter in some ways than in some countries. So we want to proactively teach behavior expectations, for example, using SLANT and other proactive positive behavior strategies to show our students what it means to be in a US school. SLANT stands for sit up, listen, act interested, nod, and track the speaker. So that's an example of a poster you might have in your classroom. We also want our newcomer teachers for recently arrived ELs to share common instructional tools. This is an example of an alphabet chart that is made more respectful for older students that they could keep in their binder that they now share among classes and refer to on a consistent basis. So we're really building in these proactive supports to lower the affective filter, make students more successful, and create more of a unified program for our newcomer students. Because in Fairfax, we do not have a separate newcomer center or programming, so we want to design the programming within the base school. What just flew in are the note-taking device, so having some common instructional strategies among teachers is helpful. At the middle school and high school level, we've developed a new course, a curriculum called Strategies for Success, that helps students learn how to navigate school, specifically learn the language of school, develop these organizational skills, study skills, strategies, set goals. But another key part of this is going back to those core stressors, is learning how to build relationships and really building that strong classroom community so that they feel a part of that classroom, part of that school, and that they learn how to advocate for themselves or others. So this connects to SLIFE students because SLIFE students would be part of this class, and it is essential that they are explicitly taught these skills and strategies for school success, even if they haven't been in school for a long time. We are also finding that students at the elementary level need support with orienting to US schools. So we have a Strategies for Success newcomer curriculum as well. And that is just a 6-week orientation to an elementary school, might occur 30 minutes a day for students to acclimate, understand how the elementary school works, build that classroom community, understand technology skills, gain oral language, and learn how to advocate for themselves. So we believe that this core instruction and Strategies for Success really supports our SLIFE students and is an essential component of making sure that they're successful and that they're ready and able to learn in our schools. So we have our first Q&A right now. I will go ahead and open it up. And if you would like to ask questions, we'll go ahead and answer. Diane's going to help us
I'll help by reading.
moderate.
If you want to get a sip of water, Karen, you're doing a great job. So one of our questions came in through the chat, but we're going to try and keep them on the Q&A, but I'll read that one. And the question is the course an additional course? So strategies for success.
Yes, so strategies for success at the high school level is an elective course. So it does not take the place of their core classes. It's designed to for the newcomer students as an elective to orient them to school, because as I mentioned, they go directly into credit-bearing content courses and they need help navigating school and acclimating.
Great. And another, we have a few questions coming in now. Anne asks, who teaches the class?
So right now at the high school level, and I would say this is true at middle school and at elementary, it's an ESOL teacher who teaches the Strategies for Success class. We believe, however, that really anyone could teach it, and that even if you can't offer a class, the idea is to provide specific instruction that helps orient students to school. So that really could be any teacher during intervention time, if you don't have a standalone class period.
Great. And Robin asks, how long is the course for the class?
So at high school, it is a year-long course. At middle school, we have designed it as a semester-long course. And then again, at elementary, we have it designed as a 6-week unit to orient students to the school.
Great. Aileen asked, can you elaborate on what educational pathway options are available to ELS, specifically with regard to high school graduation options and or vocational track? That's a
hefty one, yeah. So we've really been working at the high school level on our pathway to graduation in Virginia. So we have ELS having access to credit-bearing courses for graduation. Some of them are sheltered, meaning that they are offered for English learners in an accessible format, but the student is still, for example, accessing government curriculum and getting a social studies credit. We in Fairfax are very lucky to have our career and technical academies, which students will have access to usually in their junior or senior year. And if they choose a vocational track, that is up to them, but it's really about academic advising is what we're finding, that students really need time to explore their interests and determine their own pathway. And part of what we do in the Strategies for Success class actually is collaborate with the high school counselor so that the students understand the pathway to graduation, the options that are in Fairfax County Public Schools, because we were finding that they might not always be informed about the opportunities that can be afforded to them within our school system.
Great. And just in the interest of time, we're going to have to just choose a couple more. And then I said it here in the chat that if we can't answer, if Karen and Sonia can't answer your questions now verbally, we can follow up by email. You can email them directly and they'll provide their contact info at the end of this presentation. Here's a question from Raynalyn. How were you able to advocate for the students and the need for the classes with your district? And that might be really helpful for smaller districts taking part today. Any advice there?
We have gone through the process as part of our strategic plan. I think we've been very lucky to really have a refocus on English learners in our division. And so part of it was really coming from our school board of saying, what are we doing for our newcomers and our students with interruptions? And so we designed a course to meet the needs and piloted it at 2 high schools first. So I think one thing to do is to create it and pilot it on a smaller scale so that people can see the value before you try to scale up, so to speak.
Okay, great. And Chris had a question. How does the cohort model look at the elementary level?
So the cohort model might, at the elementary level, certainly we want English learner newcomers to be part of their general education peers, but it may look like some intentional clustering of students, so you don't have one newcomer in one class and one newcomer in another class, that the students are clustered together, and that it's also flexibly grouped. And even if students are in different classes, someone else asked, when do we have this 30 minutes a day for 6 weeks? One of the schools we were working with was doing it kind of at the end of the day, during specials, Some of them were doing it as lunch bunch, you know, pulling their newcomer kids together during lunchtime to practice English skills in a more informal way. So I think it's really about being creative. You could do it after school, but the cohort is really that idea of, like, instead of spreading out all your newcomers, you don't want to overload a class and put 20 newcomers in one, but that idea of clustering so that the ESOL teacher can get to them, they can get strategies for success, and their classroom teacher has a little bit more support from the ESOL teacher as needed.
Great, thanks so much. And we'll just, in the interest of time, have to keep moving ahead, but please do continue to type in your questions. And now?
And now it's me, it's Sonia. Hi, everyone. So I was going to talk about the solution seeking for our SLIFE students. So actually, for any English learner, it's important to problem solve for the individual student and identify where he or she is struggling to be able to support them more effectively. So this is going to be the focus of this section, and kind of the reasoning behind why we problem solve for our English learners, and specifically for our SLIFE students. So the first thing that we did in Fairfax County was to define our SLIFE students. So again, VDOE, Virginia, hasn't necessarily defined SLIFE, but here in Fairfax, we decided to identify a definition, again, for accountability purpose and to help our schools identify the planning of students with limited or interrupted formal schooling. So as you can see, we defined our SLIFE students as English learners in grades 3 and above who have a WIDA ELP of a level 1 or a 2 and have 2 years of interruption, consecutive or cumulative, and or significant gaps in home language, literacy, and numeracy. So again, why we've done this again is only to flag our students. That's why there's a little red flag there. And really this flag is really for our teachers. So our teachers, our schools know, our teachers know that they might need to kind of pay more attention or pay close attention to the progress that the SLIFE student may be making. I think it's also important to note that not all our SLIFE students will struggle or have problems accessing instruction. So I think that's something to make sure that that again, we don't generalize, or there's not this hyperbole, oh, all our SLIFE students are gonna struggle. Again, not all of them struggle, and that's why we do flag them here to kind of, again, make sure that we plan effectively and monitor their progress here. So in Fairfax County, we have a service called SLIFE Consultations. So part of the SLIFE services that we have, part of our program model, are SLIFE Consultations. And my team, it's called the Dual Language Assessment and Consultations team, provides this support to our 196 schools and centers. And so basically what happens is that, for example, a school identifies an English learner with a level 1 or a 2 that is basically struggling with instruction. And really, it is our hope that the student has been identified to the collaborative learning team or the collaborative team or a problem-solving team. And that problem-solving team has began to put some supports and interventions in place for that student. However, if that student continues to struggle and the school is needing more information or support in designing some type of intervention plan for this student, the school can request a SLIFE consultation. And my team, we go out there and we provide home language literacy assessments. And we also we're piloting a numeracy assessment, and we gather information, which we'll be talking about shortly, around the WIDA 7 integral factors. And then we gather all that information and we sit down with the school to design an intervention plan for the student. And again, that intervention plan can take a lot of forms depending on the specific need of the individual student. So again, this SLIFE consultation is for those students that are not accessing quality instruction, have again little to home language literacy skills, and may have interrupted formal schooling or limited formal home language instruction. And what we define as limited formal home language instruction are those students, for example, that have an educational history of being retained multiple years. So there is no, again, there is no formal interruption, but there is limited formal education. So, so again, this is something that us as a big division are able to support. However, in smaller districts or in schools, what you can do is again problem solve for these students at the individual level, pulling from your resources, pulling from your counselors, pulling from your social workers, pulling from the experts in your buildings to problem solve for the student. And so I'm going to go on to the next slide, which are the WIDA 7 integral factors. And I want to share with you is that I believe Diane and her team in Support Ed has shared with you our WIDA 7 factors instructional tool that actually my team uses to gather information for students who are struggling. So what we like to do is, and again, WIDA is very, again, there's research behind that. If students WIDA basically says that there are factors that impact language and academic development. So gathering information on these 7 factors on individual students is very important. For example, the personal and family factors for those students, again, are recently arrived ELs who've immigrated to this country is pretty unique, and there are some needs there. So for example, there are kids that have been the parents left when they were young, when they were infants, and now suddenly at the age of 15, 16, they meet their parents after not having seen them for 13 years. So those personal and family factors actually have a lot of impact on our students and can really again you can see that sometimes reflected in their lack of effort, or their lack of just not wanting to do work, their attitude, that all carries over sometimes into the classroom. So again, identifying these factors, like I said, the personal and family factors, for example, also the previous schooling. There are students who come from very small rural villages. I'll give you the example of Guatemala. So in Guatemala, we have students that live in very rural areas and very small villages that really go to school maybe for 3 hours a day or 5 hours a day. Some go from there's 2 shifts, from 7 to 12, 1 to maybe 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And sometimes it's the teacher who doesn't show up to provide instruction for the students, which obviously impacts the student. So those previous schooling factors also are impactful. And while I'm in the previous schooling factors, there are rural villages, for example, in Guatemala, where another language is spoken or a dialect is spoken. So you have Spanish, which is the formal, the educational language of instruction. However, again, there's another dialect, and so it's a bilingual education. So, for example, students that speak Ichil are instructed both in Spanish and in Ichil. So that's another piece of the puzzle that teachers need to be aware of as they begin to problem solve for students, because English, when they're sitting here in our classrooms, is a third language actually. So that's also a huge factor. So now I wanted to really go into the physical and psychological factor as to why it's important to gather information. And that is because sometimes we tend to blame everything in terms of, we try to solution seek in terms of the academic component of our students. Oh, the student doesn't have literacy, so therefore the student, that's why the student is struggling. You know, he doesn't know how to read, he doesn't know how to write, he's struggling with math, and therefore he or she is not making any gains. But actually, sometimes, again, as we dig deeper, it's really some other factor that might be impacting. We had a student, for example, in one of our high schools that was not coming to school, and basically what was happening is that she was not coming to school because she had an infection of the mouth. Her teachers were actually worried about her because she was not making any gains in reading and writing, but she actually wasn't coming to school, and she wasn't coming to school because her gums bled, and then the mother had to take off from work to pick her up and what have you. And so what happened, the intervention for that student wasn't an academic intervention. It was actually just a referral to the social worker to get her to a doctor to get that taken care of. And actually, I'm proud to say that she's sitting in classrooms. This is her second year here, and she's actually doing very well. So I hope you find that tool useful. Again, I want to just stress that not all our SLIFE students require intensive literacy intervention. Here you have just an example of three of our high schools. The numbers of recently arrived ELs that they received, the number of SLIFE students that were identified, and again, those students that needed intervention support, and these students actually needed literacy intervention support. So I can't stress enough the importance of really identifying our students who are struggling so we can definitely provide them the appropriate intervention support. So I've shared a lot.
Good job, Sonia.
I've said a lot. So if you have questions, please ask.
They are coming in.
Oh, they are coming in?
Yeah,
Wow.
I can read a few for you. One is, does your district require SLIFE consultation or intervention prior to special education referral or consideration?
So the answer is absolutely. So one of the things that we want to do, again, because our students come from all walks of life and have had different opportunities to access quality instruction, right? They're just different. So we actually implement a multi-tiered system of support. And so we actually have to provide intervention for our students and progress monitor our students, because we really don't want to identify a student as having a disability without really having done our homework and provided the support that that student may need.
Great. And another question is, you mentioned you do a home language literacy assessment as part of the SLIFE consultation. How do you do this for the many different language backgrounds?
So great question. And there's actually a slide where we provide you the information of what assessments we use for our Spanish speakers. But you're actually going to get to my talking point, is that for students that speak another language other than Spanish, we actually use our interpreters. And so we use our interpreters to help us with our writing samples, also with our reading to see how much a student comprehends. So we use interpreters. And again, our information is going to be qualitative information that we gather. And unfortunately, again, there's not a lot of resources for students that speak another language.
I would add, Sonia, that we always assess, even if we're with an interpreter in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, they may just be more qualitative.
Yes.
So the interpreter reading a passage in the home language, doing a writing sample in the home language, interviewing a student in the home language, and then working with the interpreter to kind of gauge the student's home language proficiency.
Great. And maybe just time for one or two more here. And another one from Noelle is, how do you collect this SLIFE data from each student, and where do you house that data? And maybe what can a smaller district do?
Sure. So actually, when one of our teachers goes out to do a SLIFE consultation, we actually gather the information, and then we gather the information, but then we sit with the team. And once we sit with the team, we kind of develop next steps together for that student, and then we actually develop a report that goes into the student's CUME file.
Okay. And one final question is, do you have interpreters from the indigenous languages, for example, from Guatemala?
So unfortunately, we don't have, for example, for Guatemala, that the students speak Mam and Ichil. We do not have interpreters. However, we know that the academic language, the language of instruction in Guatemala is Spanish. So we do assess what Spanish skills they have. And again, we use other data like interruption in their home country and other, again, information that we kind of gather for the student to kind of determine what need the student may have.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll have one more chunk of presentation and then one final opportunity for questions.
All right, so here is where we're going to talk about a little bit about the numeracy and literacy supports that we have here in the county. And again, I'm going to go into a little bit of the home language assessments that we use, and these are home language assessments that we use for our Spanish-speaking students. And those are, we use actually the spelling inventory in the Words Their Way book. And we know that orthography is directly, it gives us a quick gauge as to what the student knows in terms of their word knowledge, and it gives us a glimpse of what reading and writing skills the student may have. Because if the student really is in that alphabetic stage, we know that the student is unable to read and write. So that one quick assessment, a spelling inventory, gives us, again, that really quick kind of determination that the student might need support, or that I need to gather more information in terms of reading and writing. And in terms of reading, we assess the reading comprehension of the student. We actually use a component of the Brigance Assessment of Basic Skills, the revised Spanish edition. And so we use that component to assess comprehension. We know that our Spanish speakers, for the most part, are very bad decoders. However, some of them can be horrible decoders. However, they can be comprehending text at a 9th grade level. And that's what we want to, I mean, again, I think we need to understand that our students haven't had the opportunity to learn how to read like we teach it here in the United States. And so therefore, I have to look at comprehension, and actually research says that we kind of see what a student is able to get from a text to be able to measure the level of reading. Kind of like SOLs, right? Or I call it our SOLs, our standards of learning here in Virginia. We measure comprehension. The next tool that we use is the WIDA writing rubric. And so we use the WIDA writing rubric, again, to assess the home language writing skills that the student has. One of the things that's universal is the fact that all languages, for the most part, have a discourse level, a word level, and a sentence level. And again, I think using WIDA gives us kind of like a good, again, a good tool to kind of at least see what the student is able to do at those different dimensions of academic language in their home language. And again, it's something that anybody has access to and can use. And then for math, we're piloting this year the Added Advantage MR math assessment. So it's a math recovery assessment, and we're doing the addition and subtraction component of that assessment. So again, this is what we use for our Spanish-speaking students. Again, we're using interpreters to support the assessment of our students that speak other languages. You wanted to add anything, Karen?
I was just going to mention again and reiterate that those are assessments for the home language in Spanish, and that if students may really need this next part of intervention and literacy if they are below a 3rd grade level in home language literacy. So we're really looking for students who are lacking letter sound correlation in the home language, that if students even have limited literacy skills, if they're comprehending and reading at a 4th grade level, then research in our own division has really showed that those students can make quick gains in their content classes and do not need intensive literacy intervention in English.
Right. And thank you, because that was an important piece. So it's again, those students that need kind of this intensive support are those with below 4th grade home language literacy skills in reading and writing. And so here our SLIFE services at the secondary level includes a course that's called Literacy Essentials for ELS. And again, we're piloting the math, which is called Numeracy Essentials for ELS. And again, this course focuses on the basic components of literacy, which is, I'm kind of jumping ahead to the other slide, which is on phonemic awareness, phonics, reading fluency, reading comprehension, vocabulary development, and again, one of the biggest focuses is oral language development, because without oral language, really these things can't be done. And again, this type of, the course, the intervention course is in English. It's not in the home language. And I want to go back to the previous slide, because for our little ones at the elementary level, as I mentioned, we actually we provide a multi-tiered system of support. So at the elementary level, that intervention that is designed for the student, again, it's not a course, but it's really designed to meet the individual academic need that specific SLIFE student might have. So the student, again, is still receiving core instruction, is receiving that strategies for success, that 6-week, 30-minute-a-day curriculum, and then receiving intervention. And so again, I can't stress enough that oral language development piece, in order for our students to begin accessing these components of literacy and numeracy, to be quite honest.
And I want to add to Sonia here, because I think you also got a handout that was the individualized learning plan. So the other part of this is really designing learning targets based on the student's needs and designing the intervention based on students' needs. So we don't use a specific program. We are looking at these fundamental components of literacy, building oral language development, but Sonia's team works with our teachers to set individual student goals. So there may be, let's say, learning the letter sounds of the alphabet might be a goal, and then actually tracking the letter sounds that they know might be something as part of the phonics or phonemic awareness component. They're building oral language, reading fluency. So it's really a balanced literacy model that you might see as a class at our secondary, but would look very much like an elementary classroom with that oral language development at the core.
Right. And so that ILP really, what you received are sort of like our core standards that are basically K2. And again, we use them to help guide our goal setting for our students.
So one of the resources that we have used to design the intervention as well as core instruction for our SLIFE students. So our SLIFE students might be in strategies for success, literacy intervention, which is literacy essentials for ELS, but they would still be taking at our high schools government and other credit-bearing courses. So we have found this book by Marshall and DeCapua instrumental in understanding how to bridge oral language traditions that our SLIFE students may be coming with. So our students have life experiences, they have strengths, they have numerous functional skills. This book helps bridge that to our academic skills in the United States and that very individualized accountability that we have. And so we highly recommend this book as a tool. And there's a MALP education website. It's called the Mutually Adaptive Learning Paradigm. And it's really about adapting and meeting the needs of students and recognizing that many of our SLIFE students are actually older and come with skills rather than seeing our students as not having anything, even though they may have significant literacy gaps. So it's really a value-added model, and I highly recommend it. We also know that our ESOL teachers have a great wealth of knowledge and research-based practices that actually support our SLIFE students. So
Our ESOL teachers are probably trained in the natural communication approach, TPR, the total physical approach. We strongly support and believe in the language experience approach, and often our literacy essentials teachers will do shared writing with the students, where the students will tell the story. They will have a shared writing experience with the teacher. Then they will practice reading that. They will practice talking about it. They will practice writing. We also think it's critical to build those native language bridges, especially between the students' home language. So even though the intervention may be in English, we're really helping students understand cognates and word parts and see patterns so that they can really understand that their home language, their native language, is a tool. And we provide explicit instruction and language-rich classrooms, which means having word walls and small groups and oral language and sentence frames and all of those really rich instructional practices in place. Here's a list of resources for you. So again, Marshall and DeCapua are our favorite. There's some articles in addition to the book. We had mentioned the U.S. Department of Education Newcomer Toolkit. That is really instrumental. WIDA, we have mentioned their resources, their rubric, as well as the 7 factors comes from WIDA's RTI2 bulletin, which is a free download from the WIDA website. And then WIDA also has a focus article on SLIFE that really lays out all of those instructional practices that we mentioned. What does high quality instruction look like? So we're going to go back to Q&A for another couple minutes.
And we will keep you very busy. There have been quite a few questions. So one of them is, how does your district, so how does Fairfax County approach the families or relatives of these students?
Right. So we actually have, as part of our program model that we did not address in the webinar today, that's another webinar, we have designed what we call a systems of support that includes parent and family engagement. A huge part of that is that welcoming environment extends to the parents and the family, that the parents are informed, especially if there are these significant interruptions, so that they understand the learning plan for their students. And then there are other resources for families. So in Fairfax, actually, we have an amazing, and it's not from our office, it's from the Family and School Partnerships Office, reunification curriculum. So there's resources for parents who are reunifying with their students, in addition to resources for students who are reunifying with their parents. So families, we didn't talk a lot about, but they're absolutely critical.
Great. Another question is, would a student be eligible for SLIFE services if he or she has been in the U.S. for more than a certain length of time?
So we have also another service called L Consultations, where we actually, again, do a little bit of gathering data on the students, those 7 integral factors. And what we do then, since the student has been here a little bit longer, we use diagnostic assessments in English to kind of help us understand where the student is struggling in English. So yes, we do provide supports, again, for all our English learners, whether they're SLIFE or not.
But we might bring in more of that English diagnostic lens to those students who have been here longer.
Great. And Felipe asks a few questions, and maybe we can just talk a little bit about this generally. He says that your core content seems very comprehensive in terms of social emotional needs. At the middle school and high school level, how do you reconcile credit accumulation, state assessment requirements?
So we, within the past couple of years, have gone through the process of redesigning our high school programming to really allow for credit-bearing courses. That means we've designed, and in the state of Virginia, Sonia had mentioned SOLs before, we have designed some of the courses where students do not have to take those standardized tests right away, so that they have access to the content and the credit, but are not necessarily taking the barrier tests within the first year. So we've kind of picked the ones that are accessible to students. So we're starting with government, active physics, some of them in the state of Virginia. We are looking at it very carefully, and one of our parts of our redesign was to both scaffold content but provide students and ensure that they have access to a 4-year pathway to graduation. Our students who do have these really significant home language literacy gaps may need to defer, let's say, English 9, 9th grade English for a year if they're not reading and writing in the home language. And so it may take them longer to graduate, may take them 5 or 6 years, but our goal is for all Ls to have access to a pathway to a 4-year graduation.
Great. And I think we'll probably have time for maybe one more question. How are your SLIFE students at the secondary level graded?
Grading is always a hot topic.
Right. So we actually, we suggest that the course is a pass-fail course, because what we're measuring
For
is
the intervention.
For the intervention. I'm sorry. Thank you. Yes, for the intervention class, the literacy essentials for ELS, when we're intervening for our SLIFE students, that it be a pass-fail class, because we're looking at whether the student is making progress. So that's one component. Again, we're looking at progress over time. We also have, if you saw in the ILP, you saw again whether the student, it's kind of like a 4-point rubric that we use, whether a student is making progress, not making progress, or am I missing one? I'm probably missing one. But anyway, we're really looking for our students that they make progress over time. For the most part, the number, our students at the end, what we've seen is that at the end of 1 year, from students that didn't know how to read, we can get them up to a first, sometimes second grade reading level. And it's pretty exciting because it really gives the students independence. So again, this is our second year providing that course. We're still gathering data and information, but some of our students have nicely integrated and are on a pathway to graduation. So we're really happy about that.
We'll do just one final question. What supports are there for SLIFE students and tools for their teachers as the students move beyond their initial year of school?
So our theory of action is really that if we do appropriate problem solving, provide access to intensive literacy intervention, that the student would not need intervention if they got up to, let's say, a second grade level, that those types of supports, that the student would be able to access core content and continue with their pathway to graduation. I would emphasize that that has to do with really good problem solving at the beginning and collaboration with the school counselor, the social worker, the psychologist, because we are seeing sometimes trauma or reunification being the factor of what's inhibiting the students' learning, not literacy.
Right. I would like to, I know that was our last question, but I would like to end that no matter how many interventions, that no matter how many things we do for our students, I would like to stress the relationship building. It's building relationship with our kids that it's really the key to success. One of our students in Falls Church, mentioning the high school here, he actually was going, after being intervened, he was going to quit school. We were so disappointed because he was one of our high flyers, yet at the beginning of this year he stayed, and he's continuing his education. And I asked him, I said, why did you stay? And his answer was, because you believed in me. So it wasn't because I now learned how to read or because I knew how to do school. Again, it was about the relationship that was built with the students. So I really want to leave in this positive note that we can do it by building relationships with our students. And thank you.
All right, so you will have access to our contact information. You can reach me and Sonia at Fairfax County Public Schools. So it's SP Arellano and KH Kleiber at fcps.edu.
Great, and please, we have a few more minutes, so we want to just kind of wrap up with a couple of things. And if you're interested in this topic, our group Support Ed is going to be offering a 7-week, 10-hour online SLIFE course that you can take at your convenience. The dates are January 22nd to March 9th, and we'll send out some information on this webinar. And actually our meeting today, on our 7-week course, our meeting today came out of questions from our webinar that we ran earlier this year. So a little bit more info on you. For you, we also offer, in addition to the SLIFE course, some more 10-hour, 7-week online courses that are also going to be taking place January 22nd through March 9th. One is based on our new best-selling book with Sydney Snyder and myself, Unlocking L's Potential, Strategies for Making Content Accessible. And again, we have the SLIFE course that we mentioned, as well as Effectively Advocating for English Learners, which is framed around my best-selling book. And that's been a very popular course if you're interested in practical tools to advocate for English learners. So next, we have a poll for you that hopefully should pop up right now. I believe you can read it, so you can answer another question. One is, would you attend another Support Ed webinar? So click yes or no. And then question 2, we'd like to be able to offer more webinars in the future to see, to get a sense of what topics you might be interested in. So we've named a few here of our popular professional development topics: scaffolding instruction, teaching academic language to English learners, effectively advocating for English learners, excuse me, formative assessment for ELs, culturally responsive instruction, and collaboration and leadership in support of ELs. We'll give you a minute or a few more seconds to click, and we will end the poll. Okay, this is just for our information. So I believe I can share the results with you. Hopefully that's popping up on your screen. So somehow or other, 113% of you would attend another Support Ed webinar. I guess you got the bonus question correct. And as far as additional topics, a lot of you said collaboration and leadership. That came out in the lead. So thanks so much for sharing that information with us. And so if you would like to keep our conversation going, we encourage you to join our Facebook community, and you would just look up Support Ed Community in Facebook, and please let us know what you're up to and let us know any questions you might have.
All right.
And I think we have
Thanks, Diane.
one more slide,
Oh,
just
one
with
more
my
slide.
contact info. If you want to get a hold of me, I'm Diane@getsupported.net. So thank you so much, everyone, and thanks so much to Karen and Sonia for providing our wonderful presentation with lots of practical strategies. And I suspect you might be hearing from some people in the future.
Yes, I just want to add that for those of you who are in Fairfax, Sonia and I will have some upcoming trainings in January, so please reach out to us. We have started working with the Virginia Department of Education for those of you who are in Virginia to provide training. If you're not in Virginia, we're happy to answer your questions. But if you are in Fairfax, please contact us because we do have a day-long workshop that will be rolling out in January. And we also have our director here. Do you want to say hello, Rich?
Hi, everyone.
This is Rich Polio. He's our director. He's with us today.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for a wonderful collaborative effort, and hopefully we can provide another free webinar for you in the future. So thanks. We're going to now end our meeting, and you'll get the recording soon, as long as we save the right one. Thanks, everyone.